Hello, everyone. Welcome to Supporting Victims and Survivors of Faith. This is the 2021 Safe Havens 9 webinar series, and this is the very first. This is our season kickoff today. Our series for advocates and allied professionals. Our goal is to support all of you as you meet the needs of faithful clients, and we are delighted that you're here today with us. We're going to review the whole 9 webinar series at the end of this presentation, but just so that you know that this is part of a bigger whole, so we're delighted to have you here. So today we're going to look at the importance of faith in the lives of some of the faith-affiliated survivors that you work with, and we are delighted that you're all here with us. Thank you. I know that that was a bit of a, what can I say, like a funny travel from one platform to another, but here we are, so thank you. My name's Anne-Marie Hunter, and I'm the Director of Safe Havens Interfaith Partnership Against Domestic Violence and Elder Abuse. I've also worked in a couple of domestic violence service agencies, one in Massachusetts and one in New Jersey. And I'm also an ordained United Methodist faith leader, and I have led my own congregation for 6 years north of Boston. So I kind of have a foot in several camps, so that's who I am. With me today are 2 of my wonderful Safe Havens colleagues, and I'm going to turn it over to them to introduce themselves.
Hi, everyone. This is Allison Morse-Katzman. I'm the Associate Director at Safe Havens, and I am thrilled that you have joined. I see some friendly names, people that we've worked with from as far away as Alaska and down to Virginia, and it's wonderful to have you on and wonderful to have people who we don't know on yet. So we hope this is the beginning of a great friendship. I'm going to turn it over now to my colleague, Katie.
Hi everyone, my name is Katie Oitman and I am the Program Coordinator for Safe Havens. I would just like to reiterate what Allison and Anne-Marie said. I'm very excited to be with you all here today, and thank you so much for joining us. We're really excited to get started.
Thank you, Allison and Katie. I just wanted to start by thanking the Office on Violence Against Women as well as the U.S. Department of Justice. We're so grateful for their partnership and support on this project, and we feel as though it's such a blessing to be able to do this work. So we're deeply grateful to them for their support. So our first question for all of you, we want to know who you are as well, now that you know who we are. So we're wondering if you could answer this poll, who is on this call. And Stephanie was, because we changed platforms, scrambling just a little bit on getting the polls ready. So since the poll is not popping up, what I would love for you all to do is just let us know in the chat box how you identify yourself as advocate, rural advocate, or an allied professional that is working in the field of domestic and sexual violence. We'd love to know who you are and how you identify. So if you could let us know in the chat box, that would be awesome. I'm seeing, let's see, someone from the board. That's amazing. Community advocate. Oh, there's our poll. Great. So it looks like we have lots of advocates, lots of rural advocates, yay, social workers, and other. So we're delighted to have you all here with us. That's wonderful. Perfect. Thank you. And thank you, Stephanie. And then our next question is about what are you seeing in your community? Whoops. Why did that happen? Hold on. There we go. What you're seeing in your community. We're wondering if you're working with faith-based survivors. I'm sure you are. Have you partnered with faith-based organizations, and what kind of relationships do you have with local clergy or faith communities in your location? So maybe start putting that in the chat box before Stephanie gets it up on the screen for us. I know this is a big question. You could write quite a bit on this, I'm sure. Oh, Stephanie's saying please type it in the chat box. So open conversations with local faith organizations, that's excellent. That's the beginning of a relationship and trust, building trust. They raise funds, and folks do direct intervention with survivors as well, faith-based and founded by a female pastor. Awesome. Elmi is saying, I have worked with faith-based survivors, building relationship with some local clergy and churches. Coretta has partnered with faith-based organizations. A couple of other people are still typing. I really appreciate you letting us know. Oh, so yes, recruiting volunteers for the program. That's a wonderful way to involve faith leaders and faith communities. Our training institute frequently receives training requests from churches and other faith-based organizations. Excellent. Jocelyn, that's really great work. Great news. I'm glad that's happening. One more. I'm just waiting for Meredith to. Yep. DVSA Advocate, we partner with many faith-based organizations. That's great. So we're really, really glad to hear that this is happening. And I feel as though the faith communities are in a little bit different place maybe than they were even 10 years ago. I feel like there's been movement. So hopefully that's what you're seeing as well. And if you want to comment on that, feel free to put that in the chat box too. But I wanted to just touch lightly on what today's goals are for the presentation. We wanted to explore some of the faith concerns that may be important to some of the victims of abuse that you're working with. We also want to really drive home that faith can be both a resource and a roadblock. And I know from the work that I did in the Domestic Violence Service Agency that I heard a lot about faith as a roadblock, and I think I kind of skewed in that direction. But it's important to recognize both resource and roadblock and then ask ourselves, how can we make this as much a resource as possible, as little a roadblock as possible? So we'll be talking about that a little bit too. We want to do some role clarity for faith communities and faith leaders. I really don't want them, or we don't want them, stepping on toes of services that are already provided in the community. But on the other hand, we feel that faith communities and faith leaders have their own unique and distinct role that's sadly needed, and so we want to talk about that a little bit too, and how that role can dovetail with what you all are doing, and then just providing some ideas and resources for faith community outreach and training and resources and so forth. So yeah, hoping to get to all that today. So just a few words about Safe Havens itself. We are multi-religious, and we are a nonprofit based in Boston. We started out just doing local training to help very diverse faith leaders and communities think about this and figure out, first of all, what is domestic and sexual violence, and then second of all, how do I build partnerships with my local advocates? So how do we go about this in a way that's effective and safe? So we started with that local work. That we did very comprehensive training. We developed a very comprehensive training program that was really collaborative. We worked with service providers, everybody from our domestic violence shelter providers to child witness to violence, batterers intervention, et cetera. Obviously our sexual assault providers as well. So we were doing that here locally, and we came to the attention of the Office on Violence Against Women, and they asked if we would please kind of help spread that around the country. So we are not experts in the sense that every community is different, but we do have ideas, and we've been doing this for a while. So we're really, really happy to be technical assistance providers. This is also really important and interesting to us, so we're so interested to hear what's happening in your communities and so forth. So since about 2003, we've been providing education resources and technical assistance for both service providers and faith leaders around the U.S. And everywhere from Alaska, so shout out, Alaska, Florida, Maine, Southern California, and a lot of places in between. We've been in about 28 communities over the last few years, so we love going to communities. Right now, of course, we're all online, but we're looking forward to being able to come to communities as well, and in the meantime, we're providing our trainings online. So that's who we are in a nutshell. So we wanted to look a little bit at why faith might matter to y'all, and how it could be important in your work. The first thing to know, of course, is just that many Americans are faith-based. The numbers are declining with time, so younger folks are less likely to be faith-affiliated than older adults. However, even among younger adults, it's more than 60%. So it's a good slice of the community that affiliates with a faith community. And the U.S. is also very religiously diverse, so that's another important aspect of this. There are lots of traditions that a client could be a member of, and lots of beliefs and culture norms that could affect how a client assesses what's happening, understands their options, etc. So we also want to acknowledge, though, that there are many people who are disconnected from a faith community through no fault of their own. So this is sort of the barrier part of faith communities. There are lots of victims and survivors who have been shamed, blamed, silenced, ignored when they try to talk about abuse of any kind within the faith community. So that's important to know, that there are lots of survivors out there who are unaffiliated, although they may still be just as spiritual and observant as they were before. But also we need to acknowledge that there are other folks who are distanced from faith communities for lots of reasons. You could be a member of the LGBTQ community, you could be Native American, you could be a member of a community that has been oppressed by faith communities. So it's really important to acknowledge that many people are unaffiliated, but that this is still a really important part of who they are, and that unaffiliation isn't necessarily their fault. So the other thing is to know that I know that there are under-resourced communities everywhere across the U.S., and that these are places that need and deserve special attention because they bear a disproportionate burden of violence. And folks in these communities may face additional barriers to safety. This could be rural, low-income, religious, urban, religious and cultural minority, urban, immigrant and refugee communities, etc. The important thing to notice is that these are also places where faith is very vibrant and central. And so in these communities, the faith community may be the only institution available, the only trusted institution. In any case, partnerships with faith leaders in these communities could be key to working with them and with survivors in these communities. So another important thing to remember. So survivors encounter many barriers. I know I'm not telling you anything you don't know when I name some of these, as shame and family and cultural constraints, community norms, financial difficulties, emotional ties to the abuser, but there are also religious and scriptural misinterpretations that can be barriers to survivors. I know these are barriers that you see every single day, and some of these are rooted in the faith community, so it's important to acknowledge that as well. We also know that many victims who are faith affiliated turn to someone in their faith community for help. So this could be a faith leader, but it also could be someone in the choir or a scripture study class or the administrative assistant on Tuesday morning. So anyone in a faith community could be, could be a resource. And so we like to tell folks in faith communities to think of them, all of them, as first responders. So when we train a congregation, we try to train a broad swath of the congregation, religious education, music program, social justice committee, the women's group, the men's group, the breakfast group, whomever. So we try to just touch as many parts of the congregation as we can, because all those folks could be first responders. And these are quotes from the Georgia Domestic Violence Fatality Review team, which began raising awareness about the importance of faith in 2009, based on what they were seeing as they went out to interview families and friends of folks who had been murdered in a domestic violence homicide. And they quickly unearthed the need to be working with faith communities and noted that victims are likely to seek the aid of clergy. Many victims are likely to seek clergy or someone in their faith community for help. This is another study. There's so little research on victims in minority communities, but one study of older adults discovered that older women frequently named a faith leader when asked where they would turn for help if they were facing abuse, and the older the survivor, the more likely they were to name a specific faith leader or congregation. So the more concrete this option became as you talk to older and older survivors. For faith-affiliated clients, there's a direct linkage between faith and concepts like marriage, intimate relationships, dating, and gender roles. This was a study of older adults who were affirming this, but even many younger people, I find, fall back on the understandings of their family's faith tradition or cultural norms when they think of these concepts, whether or not they're actually faith-affiliated or observant in any way themselves. When they think about what is marriage, what are gender roles, those sort of assumptions that they make about those concepts often are rooted in a faith tradition that's common to their family. So for all these reasons, faith communities and leaders are a great opportunity to get information out into the community and to connect with survivors who need access to your services. So you've heard realtors say location, location, location. That how important that is. We're arguing that faith leaders and faith communities are in a perfect location to partner with all of you. So I could put my faith leader hat on here and say, we know members of our congregation really well. We often know families across generations. We visit in homes, hospitals, nursing homes, etc., and we're often trusted confidants and important gatekeepers, and we've been through other crises with folks, so very trusted usually. We also can speak with moral authority about marriage, relationships, gender roles. We can teach about these. We can influence a community's understandings of healthy relationships and abuse. And when faith is misinterpreted or misapplied to support abuse, it's faith leaders who need to respond to that and who need to redirect and reinterpret and do more teaching about these places where our faith is being misinterpreted. Faith leaders can also stay alert for signs of abuse and provide resources early, sometimes earlier than when police would have been called or, there's a major problem. And we're also an invaluable opportunity to reach faith-affiliated people in a way that is culturally sensitive about and to tell people about available services and life-saving support and safety that you all offer, but in a way that can be heard by the faith community. So, for example, just to give you an example of how faith leaders know what will work in their community, I put together this brilliant, I thought absolutely brilliant bathroom flyer for one of our, for a group of trainees at one point, and I sent it off to all the faith leaders, and I got it back from that Orthodox rabbi immediately because I had put scripture on it, and he said we don't put scripture in the bathroom. He knew that about his community. I learned that about his community, but his expertise was really important in making sure that what we provided to them was culturally sensitive and relevant to them. So many faith-affiliated clients are looking for guidance from their faith leaders, so their leadership can be really effective on this issue. And at the same time, victims of abuse who hear silence from their faith community about the abuse or about what they're suffering are also receiving a really powerful message, and it's a message that's unhelpful. So we're trying to change that as well to make faith communities as much allies as we can. And we've also heard from advocates who have been able to leverage their faith community work to include their whole community, to reach out to various congregations and to help them bring people in, either as volunteers, as allies, as folks who are supporting survivors in their own faith communities. So many opportunities here and possibilities for working together. So I wanted to stop with or end here soon with a poll about, can you think of a faith leader near you who you might be able to reach out to? Like, who comes to mind when you think of that? Are there folks that you maybe have heard about or from or worked with or met or whatever? And feel free to fill us in the chat box as well if you would like to. So, but the good news is the majority of us know of folks that we could think of actually to reach out to, and that's great news. That's really, really great news. So, yeah, thank you for that. I really appreciate it. So I want to, our numbers are changing here. So for increasing access to your services, for expanding community engagement, for responding to the needs of faith-affiliated victims, for providing services that respond to a broad spectrum of victim needs, faith-community partnerships can be really important for the work that you're doing. And of course, faith is critical to individual clients as well. Many Americans turn to their faith for guidance, meaning, and for invaluable community connections. And we know, of course, that isolation is a risk factor, so the faith community can be an antidote to that isolation. Your client's faith may be critical also to how they see the world, how they understand their own identity, how they make decisions, how they find healing and wholeness. We want to recognize that it's not just sort of surface level theological understanding. It's very deep rooted in who we are as people of faith, how we understand the world, make decisions, etc. So really important. And then we also wanted to point out that abuse itself has a spiritual component. Many people have experienced abuse as kind of spiritual abuse, and we actually have a spiritual abuse wheel that we can share with you, but victims suffer spiritually as well as physically, financially, and emotionally. So this kind of abuse can have many facets and nuances to it. There are ways in which a victim may perceive her faith as a support when experiencing abuse, and other ways in which a victim may feel that her faith is a barrier to safety. So all of that is important. And important to recognize that no one's experience with faith is entirely helpful or unhelpful, but rather that this is a very nuanced picture, but that spiritual crisis can be an important part of it for us to understand. So earlier we said that many Americans are faith affiliated, and for these Americans, obviously faith can be a source of strength, courage, connection, but it can also be mean that turning to a faith leader may not always be helpful to a victim of sexual or domestic violence or elder abuse for that matter. Tenets of many faiths have been misinterpreted to support abuse. Victims sometimes sacrifice their own safety to protect the abuser, to keep the family together, to safeguard the honor of the family, or to uphold religious values such as forgiveness or not wanting to get a divorce and so forth. So faith leaders have not usually received the training and resources about abuse that they need or that they wish they have, and as a result they are often manipulated by abusers. And they may sometimes misunderstand the seriousness of abuse. They may not have the ears to hear what survivors are saying or totally understand what they're trying to convey. So all of that's important to know, that there is this disconnect and that faith can be a barrier to safety. So all of this means that survivors who are faith affiliated may face specific kinds of barriers to their safety and may have access to specific kinds of resources as well. So we're going to talk about the kinds of barriers to safety that faith-affiliated victims may face. Just for a minute, focus on some of the barriers. this is a woman who spoke to me. She was actually using the services at one of the shelters where I worked. And she was heartbreaking that she had told a faith leader about this abuse 27 years earlier, but really had received no help, no access to resources, no referrals, no support, nothing at all. She was just told to pray harder. So this is sort of spiritualizing the abuse. We wouldn't dream of sending an untrained firefighter into a burning building, but that's pretty much what this faith leader was sent in, with no training whatsoever and had no tools in their toolbox except pray harder, and that is not an entirely effective tool when it comes to abuse. So some people just simply have not received the training and resources and technical assistance they need. And many faith leaders have also not learned about how victims may minimize abuse or how hard it is to talk about abuse. We don't know how much courage it may take a victim to disclose, and as a result, we sometimes miss that moment of disclosure, or we don't respond as supportively and effectively as we could or should. And this is obviously a survivor saying, if one look from a faith leader can shut a victim down for another 20 years. And when she said another 20 years, it told me everything I needed to know about how many years of silence she had experienced. And at the same time, victims may be interpreting the abuse through the lens of their faith. This is an example of someone who interpreted the faith through, the abuse through the lens of a Christian scripture about turning the other cheek. And said that she had done that and done that and done that. Just turn the other cheek, which to her meant, don't be defensive, but rather accept this kind of abuse. That's how she was interpreting the scripture, was accept this. So that kind of unhelpful interpretation of faith-based values and beliefs can be the script that's running in the heads of survivors that you're working with. And we need faith leaders to redirect that for sure. There's, as I said, so little research, but the Institute on Domestic Violence in the African American Community has been a star player in terms of doing research on faith and abuse. And they did research in 12 cities across the country and discovered that denial of the presence of domestic violence in the congregation was a frequent barrier to families seeking help. So I want to be very clear that abuse is silenced and denied in many faith communities, not only in the African American community, but that the Institute felt that faith was important enough that they did this research and discovered that just the failure of a faith leader to acknowledge that abuse happens among people sitting in their own pews, that denial and silencing was instrumental in keeping people from help. So when faith leaders haven't received the training and resources that they need, abuse itself is silenced or denied, victims may be blamed or judged. Their disclosure may not be held in confidence or may not be treated as sacred as it really is. We really train faith leaders that disclosure is a sacred moment and should be treated as such. And so with the very best of intentions, faith leaders, and I can say we, have endangered and prolonged the agony of victims of abuse. I'll just say that straight up. We have endangered and prolonged the agony of victims. So we at Safe Havens have another theory as well as to why there's this disconnect. People who are experiencing abuse, you all know from hearing about it how graphic and ugly and profanity-laced that experience can be. And usually survivors will tell advocates and other allied professionals about it in that kind of language. But when it comes to talking in that kind of language with your faith leader, not so much. So you may hear the terrible details while faith leaders are hearing, he's not very nice, or he called me names, or something like that. So we're hearing this sort of sanitized, minimized version, and we do not have the training, we being faith leaders, don't have the training and resources to know that that's just the tip of the iceberg and sort of a sanitized version of what's going on. And so, faith leaders may look at advocates and say, why are they overreacting? While the advocates look at faith leaders and say, why don't they understand how dangerous this is? So until we begin to do some training and begin to understand each other better, that gap remains. And it's really important that we talk about this and build those bridges of understanding and partnership. We could go on the way we are now, not working as well with each other as we could or should. But the problem with that is that the people who fall through the cracks are victims and survivors and their families, and that I can't live with. So that's why we're all about building partnerships. So when faith leaders do respond, sometimes our responses can be re-traumatizing and unsafe. We can not understand confidentiality and talk about the abuse with other people in the congregation. We may suggest unsafe solutions, as you've seen, like pray harder. We may jump in with quick fixes or glib forgiveness, try to patch over the problem with couples or marriage counseling, which is one of the most dangerous things anybody could possibly do. And we may be just a dead end as survivors try to reach safety. And for all of those reasons, faith leaders need training and resource. So we're here today to try to make this list of what happens when there isn't training and resources a thing of the past, and try to move to another day where we're able to work together. And with that, I'll hand it over to Allison.
Hi, everyone. I hope you can hear me. Someone type in if you can't. I get to talk about faith as a resource, and faith for people who are faith-based. We already talked about for faith-based victims and people experiencing abuse, how their faith can get them through. But when faith leaders and faith communities get training and resources, they're going to be more effective resources for victims who are abused, and that is what we really want to see. And in addition, faith leaders and faith communities can be allies in ending abuse, of whether it's domestic abuse or sexual abuse or elder abuse. There are so many ways that the faith community can be part of that, and we'll talk about that in a bit. So I always think this is always fascinating to me, because before I joined Safe Havens, I did not know this, that the word religion comes from the Latin word religare, which means to connect or to bind. And when we think about abuse, we know that abusers isolate their victims. And here with faith and religion, we're trying to connect or bind people to something that matters to them. So I'm just struggling with this. Okay, here we go. So in the midst of isolation and abuse, where people have their relationships destroyed and the covenant of marriage is broken, and they're torn away from the bonds of their family and the community, survivors who are faith affiliated or spiritual or faith-based in any way, they have this connection to their community and to their family and their history and spiritual roots and healing, which is what we want. And abusers are always trying to take anything away, and for people experiencing abuse to be able to hold on to that is so important. Abuse, as we said, or as I said, takes away so many things, but for victims who are faith affiliated, it's that thing inside them that no one can take away. And it also is a way for survivors to grieve what they've experienced. Abuse can make the victim feel confused, disoriented, and like they're standing on shifting sand. Faith can help faith-affiliated victims orient themselves in space and time. Abuse is traumatizing, as we said. It creates fear and spiritual and psychological damage. Faith can help faith-affiliated survivors find the strength to get through the day and provide comfort in the midst of trauma and chaos. You may already have clients or who are strongly affiliated, and for them, the approval of a faith leader is so critical when moving forward with a decision or with a new action. I share, well, I won't share that story. I'll save it for later. But this means that clergy have a tremendous ability to influence a situation or a decision-making process. Of course, not all survivors are faith-affiliated, but everyone needs to be heard and needs for someone to bear witness and someone to accompany them on the journey to safety and justice. The work that you do is critically important as you accompany your clients on this journey. For those of you who don't know the book, there is a wonderful book by Jean Anton. It's called Walking Together, Working with Women from Diverse Religious and Spiritual Traditions. I just looked it up. It's available on Amazon, and I am going to type it into the chat box for you when I am done with my little piece. I highly recommend it if you don't have it or haven't seen it to purchase it for your agency. So when it comes to welcoming clients, I like to think of this, I like to think of being faithfully or spiritually or culturally responsive. It's just like you would for any other culture or group of people. You want to demonstrate cultural humility in the work that we are doing always, and that would include the faith community. You don't want to establish any faith as normative. I think that is a little bit difficult because the normative in a lot of communities, at least the communities we work with, there are a lot of Christian communities. But if you're from a non-Christian tradition and you're coming into an agency and all you see are Christmas decorations or all you see are books on supporting Christian victims, if you're someone who's looking for help, you might think, oh, they won't understand my faith. So we would recommend you having different books available on your bookshelves for victims and clients who come in. We would also suggest that you avoid assumptions about faith affiliation. You don't know, someone might not even be faith affiliated at all, and it's best to just wait for them to talk about it. We would suggest, like you always do, is to listen respectfully, but if someone talks about their faith, it's important not to dismiss it, as we have heard no one here, of course, but in the past we have heard advocates tell us that their clients always talk about faith, but they aren't particularly interested in that. So ask if someone does talk about their faith, ask them what it is about it that helps them through their day. But as you do that, remember that you don't have to be the expert on faith, and you don't have to have all the answers. You're there to listen, just like you do for everyone else. So I'd love it if you would think to yourselves and maybe include this in, oh, look at this. We already have right here, we have a place for you to write your answers. What's one way you've seen faith act as a barrier for victims? And what's one way you've seen faith act as a resource? And you can type your responses in, and we'll wait for a couple minutes just till you can get those in and we can see some of those responses. One way that you've seen faith act as a barrier, and one way faith has acted as a resource. Don't be shy. Yes, divorce is not allowed. God hates divorce. What God has joined together, no one should rend asunder. And I would on the divorce. A lot of faith leaders, not all faith leaders, but many faith leaders would say it is not getting the divorce that breaks the marriage. It is the violence. It is the abuse that breaks the covenant of marriage. Some of the resources, clients turn to prayer in difficult times, and they'll attend church services, absolutely. Providing meals or child care for a survivor, those are great responses. Thank you for sharing those. I noticed that Anne-Marie typed in the name of the book that I recommend for you, and now I'm going to turn it over to Katie, who will take it from here.
Hoping you can hear me okay. So thank you so much, Allison. And as you all have heard, at Safe Havens, we're really working to help build these bridges between faith leaders and service providers. And we do so by using community responses based in public health. So we know that to successfully address the complex issue of domestic violence, we have to look at and utilize multiple prevention efforts that target specific risk and protective factors across individual, interpersonal, institutional, community, and societal levels. So when we think about roles for our local faith leaders, we like to think about them in that context. So I don't know if you've heard of the social ecological model. It's often used in public health. I'm thinking specifically of the Centers for Disease Control. So if you look at their website, you can find it. They have different levels in which we can enact social change. So they look at the individual, where you can think of changing people's knowledge, attitudes, behaviors. Then there's the interpersonal level between families, friends, and social networks. The community level, the relationships between organizations. Of course, the organizational levels, which would be changing the actual organizations and social institutions themselves. And then there's the policy and enabling environment. So this is at the broader level where we're actually changing policies and laws to create that long-term social change. And so we've articulated 4 major roles that we have found faith communities and faith leaders can play. And these touch upon the different social levels that I just explained briefly. So we always encourage faith leaders to work in partnership with their local advocates, you all. And so one benefit that faith leaders can provide is earlier intervention. So when faith leaders are trained on what domestic and sexual violence and elder abuse are and how to respond, they may break the silence in the congregation, acknowledge the abuse and trauma, provide assurance that the person experiencing violence is never to blame, and then they can also offer theological and spiritual and emotional support, which is really important on the individual and interpersonal levels. They can also be a bridge to resources and referrals, such as the services that you all provide. Faith leaders can also provide prevention. So trained faith leaders may invite advocates to provide preventative education. I know some of you had mentioned at the beginning that you have had requests to do training for faith leaders. And this can be really important, especially maybe if they're providing education to young congregants. Inviting advocates to introduce their agency and services to the congregation is another benefit and then role that faith leaders can provide. They also may incorporate information about intimate partner violence in premarital counseling. They can address the issue with religious and moral authority, for people that are experiencing violence and they are faith-based, this can be really important. Lastly, they also can, for prevention-wise, they can disseminate information, resources, and referrals about the services you provide. And then thinking about how faith leaders can play a role in the long-term social change. So trained faith leaders can set a moral tone for the community as a whole. They can support the domestic violence and sexual violence agencies, as I know some of you had mentioned. They are supporting you already. But then also they can help challenge sexism, ageism, homophobia, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and other forms of injustice that enable abuse and call for change. So another really important role that faith leaders can play that we don't necessarily often think about, but is really critical, is accountability. So when it is safe, faith leaders can work to hold the perpetrator accountable by encouraging perpetrators to attend a batterer's intervention program, and they can also provide spiritual support. So if you really think about this, it's all about building a two-way street. So faith leaders and faith communities members bring a lot to the table. They can provide compassion and listening. They can acknowledge the abuse, and they can also provide spiritual and material support. That's really important to faith-affiliated survivors. And faith leaders can also be a trusted guide to help people find safety. They can help the people in their congregations and their community find the resources that you all provide. A vigilant and responsive faith leader can also intervene earlier, which means, hopefully, as Anne Marie had mentioned earlier, that the trauma will be lessened and the likelihood that the victim and perpetrator can be helped successfully is increased. So if you look at this quote, I really like it because I think it shows how imperative it is that we work together. I think it illustrates this disconnect that Anne Marie had mentioned earlier that can exist between service providers and faith leaders. And this disconnect can be solved by us working together. Through training, conversations, and relationship building, we show that faith leaders can provide benefits to service providers, just as service providers can provide benefits to faith leaders, all the while keeping the person experiencing the violence at the center and ensuring that they receive the best response and resources to heal from the abuse they face. So here we can see that the importance of why we need to build these partnerships between service providers and faith communities. We at Safe Havens have found at our trainings, and Anne Marie has also mentioned previously during this conversation we're having, that time and time again, faith leaders want to do the best and they have their best intentions at heart, but sometimes they just don't know how to help and how to correctly help. So what we really need to do is create these partnerships so that faith leaders do know about the local services, that they can access them and that they can provide a warm handoff. Faith leaders may not be aware of the complexities and the role power and control play in abuse. But with these trainings and partnerships with local service providers, we have found that there is common ground to respond to the issues, and that while we may not agree on everything always, we can find trust in common ground to respond to this issue as a whole and to serve the survivor as a whole person. And so mutual trust and collaboration are the key foundations necessary to build the strong community partnerships that can make a change for individual clients and also our system as a whole. So by creating partnerships between service providers and faith leaders, we can address, again, going back to those levels, the individual, interpersonal, and community needs for combating domestic violence. And we can create this coordinated community response that better serves all people who experience violence and the society in general as a whole. So how do we build the community partnerships? We know that it's really hard work, and we do have some suggestions for things that have worked for us in the past. And these suggestions are kind of framed with with what you're looking at right now, these ideas. So the first is to listen, listen, listen. We really encourage you to listen with an open heart and an open mind. This can help us as we're learning about maybe a new faith tradition or something like that. It can help us to identify shared values. And the shared values are helpful in building lasting relationships because they help us to connect to people. And we know that building partnerships doesn't happen overnight. So it can take time, and that's why it's important to start small. So I know some of you have mentioned earlier that you have some relationships and that you have reached out to people, or that you, in the past, your faith communities have reached out to you. So leverage that. Reconnect with the faith leaders that you may have spoken to but haven't connected with in a while, or continue connect with them. Ask if they have any colleagues that would be interested in your services as well, in trainings, things like that. And lastly, it's important to build a common language. So this can mean we know that in our daily work, in our lives, we use language that oftentimes we forget isn't part of the everyday language that everyone hears. So that's really important when talking to faith leaders, that they may not understand all of the jargon that service providers use, just as service providers may not understand all of the language that comes from a particular faith tradition. So trying to build a language where you can both communicate as to create this strong community partnership is really helpful. And so here are some examples and strategies that we suggest can help for building community partnerships, some that have worked for us. So if you think about partnering directly with faith communities, it could be in various forms. So maybe a site visit or a cross training, attending an event at the faith community, such as a vigil, or encouraging faith community participation in learning sessions or on boards. And it's really important also to always keep the person experiencing violence at the center. So by thinking about gaps in services for survivors, we have found it is easier to build cooperative models for service to better serve clients as a whole. And I mentioned briefly before that warm referrals are critical to helping survivors on their journey towards healing and safety. So again, we really encourage that faith leaders refer to service providers, and that service providers can also in turn refer to trained and trusted faith leaders that they feel can help address the spiritual needs. So Safe Havens has found that learning together helps build stronger collaborations. We know that faith leaders can and do have a lot to learn about domestic and sexual violence and elder abuse and their local services in their area. And we also believe that service providers can learn from faith leaders about why faith is important to faith-affiliated survivors. So we want to reiterate the importance of focusing on caring for the survivor as a whole, which may mean referring them to a trusted and trained faith leader, as I have mentioned. And all of this relates to building a coordinated community-wide response that helps again, centering the survivor as the common ground. So we find it is easier to build the bridges necessary to achieve a coordinated response when we do these things. And so this is a really important note. We don't want anyone who's a service provider to ever assume that faith leaders have any sort of background or expertise on issues related to domestic and sexual violence and elder abuse. So with that being said, it's critical to always explain safety issues for survivors. Safety is something never to be compromised on. And while service providers hold the expertise in how to respond to survivors, faith leaders can provide spiritual guidance. So that could be helpful to have a faith leader come and train your staff on why faith is important. And also, we know that advocates are the experts at providing services to survivors, so we really recommend you describe your missions and services carefully to the faith communities you're working with. And this eloquent testimony of how a victim's life can be transformed when they realize that they are not alone and that they have their faith community at their back, I really think that it shows why building these partnerships and spending the time nurturing them is so critical. And lastly, I just wanted to, before I hand it back over to Allison, I just wanted to leave you all with this quote. And in knowing that we recognize, as I mentioned, the complexity of this issue. And we recognize that it cannot be solved or fully understood in just one training for faith leaders. So we know it requires a larger strategic plan. And that's why we're now going to talk a little bit more about how Safe Havens can help with that and help with that vision. So I'll turn it back over.
Thanks so much, Katie. How can Safe Havens help? Our goal is to help you to connect to your faith communities. We try to make it so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. We want you to strengthen relationships you already have and catalyze new relationships. And we're always trying to think of ways for you to do that. If you think of ways that we can do that, please don't hesitate to either type it in the chat box or reach out to us after. But I do want to just go over some of our materials briefly. Our newest set of materials, which if you are on our listserv, you would be getting them. We have Awareness Month materials. And for each of the 5 awareness months, stalking, dating violence, sexual violence, elder abuse, and domestic violence awareness month, we have developed short articles that you can send to your faith community, as well as a flyer about the topic with relevant links and phone numbers where they can get more information. We have included an email for you to reach out to the faith leader, so all you have to do is personalize it a little bit. We're really trying to make this as easy as possible for you and for them, so that they can raise awareness in their communities and keep this issue in the forefront. And by you reaching out to them and kind of having a connection at least 5 times a year, they're going to remember, oh yes, that's the agency that does this great work. And that over and over again, that will definitely help strengthen your relationships. We provide technical assistance. It can be now we can do it via Zoom, like everything, or we can do it over the phone or email, or sometimes if you're local, we can come to you when the pandemic's over. We're here even if you just have a question. Don't hesitate to reach out to us. We really want to make this as easy as possible for you. I'll talk about our resources or give you the links to them in a minute, but we do have resources for rural communities specifically, for non-rural communities as well. We have resources for working at the intersection of elder abuse and faith. We have translated a bunch of those resources into Spanish, and you can find them on our website right now. And the goal will be to have the whole entire page in Spanish. So if you have Spanish-speaking clients, you can refer them to that page. Give us a couple more weeks, and that should be up and running. And the most in-depth and kind of personal work that we do is when we come to you and do catalyst trainings, which we've done for some of the participants that are here today. We have been able to go in person to your site and work with you and kind of model. It's sort of a train the trainers, but it's a training to catalyze the relationships in your community. You get to meet in person your faith community members, and they get to meet you. Importantly, you get to see where they're at and what their stumbling blocks are in person. We model the training so you can use it afterwards. We provide you with the training manual. You don't have to have us come to you to use the training manual. You could ask us, or you can download it from the website as well. We can send it to you as a hard copy, and you can have us walk you through it. Like I said, our goal is to make this as easy for you as possible. Now, I'm just going to show you briefly. If you have downloaded the handout, the PDF that's in the files box, you can have links to our Hearts and Hands, which is our rural resources and toolkit for advocates and for faith leaders, or the elder abuse, again, for advocates and for faith leaders, and then what we adapted for bigger communities that aren't as rural, pieces of a bigger picture. And we have them in hard copy. If you're interested in receiving hard copies of them, just send me an email. My email's at the end. You can see that. So what I would love for you all to do is to think of at least one way that you can use one of the strategies that we've talked about to partner with faith leaders and faith communities in your area. It'd be great if you want to share it. You don't need to, but keep that in mind as you move forward from this training, because we don't want this to just be, oh yeah, I participated in that and now I'm done. Because what we really, really want you to do is help Safe Havens make faith and safety an option for all faith-based victims, and we need your help to do that. We asked a focus group, and this is a while ago now, but we asked a focus group of older survivors what message they would have for faith leaders, and that message is get trained on abuse. We would love to partner with you and your community, faith leaders, in any way to help you get the word out, help you catalyze relationships. Thank you all so much for joining us today. We thank you for bearing with us in the beginning with the technical difficulties. Hopefully that won't happen again. We look forward to future conversations. I do want to point out that we have many upcoming webinars. Anne Marie mentioned at the beginning, this is a series of webinars. We are going to explore different faith communities and different cultures that experience abuse, and we've got the list of dates here. You can register for them at the last minute, or you can register for them all right now. We'd love to have you join us. I am going to be sending you an evaluation. It will come to your email probably tomorrow. I would really greatly appreciate it if you would fill it out. It is so imperative for us to get the feedback from you so we can improve upon our work, and also to hear from you about what's working and what isn't. And here is our contact information. Don't hesitate, like I said, to reach out to any of us. We are here to work with you. And on that, the meeting was recorded, April, so you will be able to access it. We will be posting it to our website as soon as we have it available, so you can download it from our website. And I thank you all. Have a wonderful afternoon or rest of your morning, depending on where you are, and hopefully we'll see you again soon. And thank you, NCJFCJ.